You're waiting for BlendedPlanet. All right. I am taking a drink of my tasty beverage, which, by the way, is just plain old H2O. That would be also known as water. So here's what we're going to do today. First thing I'm going to do is recap the status of the show, because we've kind of entered into a really kind of a cool and fun moment in terms of the production cycle. And so we're going to recap what I've done the last few days, I think most of which was not live streamed. And then I'm going to enter into a probably, I don't know, it could take as much as a half hour, I suppose, to discuss some things about vector levels, which came up because of a question and my answers to a subscriber that just underscored a lot of the things about vector levels, which, especially for people new to OpenToonz or Tahoma, for my purposes, they're the same program. Okay, so from my perspective, there is no difference between the two because the differences are so small it doesn't matter. But newbies tend to gravitate to vector levels. That is true, and there's some good reasons for that. But the buggiest part of OpenToonz is and has always been the vector levels. They used to be impossible to fill reliably, for example, to use the fill tool, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll talk about some of the gotchas and strategies you might want to employ if you're using vector levels in particular that will help you to not lose work and also maybe do a better job of achieving what you're trying to achieve, as a cartoonist, animator, storyteller, whatever. Okay, so right now, I want to check something on my live stream because it's a little unusual. Looks like we've got 2 concurrent viewers. Hey, if you guys are there, identify yourself so I know that this stream is in fact public and that you're seeing it. Because I've had it happen before where it accidentally got set to unlisted and I'm sitting here blabbing for a half hour while there's actually nobody there. So I'm going to check my YouTube channel real quick on my other screen, and it looks like it's live, so it also looks like I might have a notification. Okay, yeah, and then there was a quick comment from the conversation I referenced just a bit ago from a current user. Okay, so here's where we're at. We're actually into the last sequence of the show. Okay, so what I've done the last few days, I'll go ahead and switch to the other screen so you guys can see the big preview. So we kind of have this situation where Mel was hiding out. All of a sudden, TNR shows up. And she's like, "Who are you?" "Me, I'm nobody." "You did not see me," she says. "I'm good with that." And then she's out of there. Then he remembers, hey, dead pianist. So then he remembers that he needs to recover the letter. All right. So now we cut to the stuff that's been done last week or so. He peeks under the tent. There's the bag. Yay, I got my bag back. He's a happy camper. But then Fala returns. And so he slips out, and she realizes that Tianara is gone, which is like really bad because she's scheduled to marry the prince in like 5 minutes. And then he looks in his bag and realizes that the letter's gone. That's pretty much it. So I actually had a more complex animation of this whole sequence here. And, I realized that what really needed to happen from a storytelling standpoint was already well baked into these shots over here. I just needed to reverse them and change the background. And so I always advise people, look, if you've got assets, actually this speaks to the vector issues because the reason, hey, Inio-san, because the reason people are attracted to vectors oftentimes has to do with reuse because of scalability and editability of the assets. So we'll get back to that here in just a second. So this is where we're at in the show, and the cool thing is, if we go back to Vegas here, what you can see is we're, and I actually just told my distributor this to let him know because he's talking to I think he had a meeting well, wait, it might be today, maybe yesterday, but had a meeting with a digital streaming, a fairly sizable streaming platform that may have an interest in underwriting the show. So it's like, that's cool. We'll see how that goes. But anyway, wanted to let him know, hey, I'm actually literally and desperately to reconnect. Oh, there it goes. So OBS just disconnected and reconnected, I think, for the first time today. And so now we have a 2-second stream delay. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of show? Well, actually, this sequence that we're entering right now is the final sequence that has to be animated. And as we scan through it, this is really all about Golek. It's really kind of funny the way it all plays out. Golek is kicking off this wedding, which he orchestrated, because indirectly it gives him a pathway to the throne. Okay, so I won't unpack all of that of why that's true, but it is true. And one of the things I like about Golek as a villain is that I can kind of sympathize with the guy, because let's face it, at the end of the day, he can only ever be the top slave. Even if you're at the top and you're still a slave, there's something about that people tend not to like. So the rain starts, and it's the first time it's rained in like forever, because there's been a drought going on. And what he does is he seizes on the moment to ascribe supernatural origin to the rain that just happened, because it happened at a very precipitous moment. And so he, being quick on his feet, attributes it to some sort of miracle, and then invites the prince to come out and speak to the crowd. And it's very ceremonial, and it's very much about orchestrating this community event that sort of is going to launch the new golden age of the kingdom. And it's all BS, because Golek's really just trying to grab power himself. The problem is, the girl that the prince is supposed to marry is gone. She has run away. And so now they go to investigate that situation and they piece together, at least Golek does, and Mel is overhearing this. He's overhearing it from the back of the tent. And he realizes this is I won't give all the details of the story, but basically this is a very negative situation that doesn't bode well for the guy that raised Mel from childhood, and that's Asher. So once we get through this whole sequence and Mel realizes that the prince is now out to get Asher, then we cut back to Asher, and then that drives through the rest of the show, where they're actually basically hitting the road and getting out of Dodge. So I hope that makes sense. So Claude is here. Hey, Claude. Happy birthday. Happy birthday, my friend. And welcome to the live stream, Nage-san. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Okay, so that's basically what's going on with the story. We're literally in the final sequence of that needs to be animated in order for the episode to be done. So now let's get back to the topic of the day. The topic of the day is vectors. So here's what happened. And forgive me, I'm going to not necessarily be drawing here for a minute. I'm just going to kind of tell you this story. Okay, so what happened was, I get this comment on a fairly old video, like a video from a year ago, where it was an OpenToonz quick tip, and it was about saving your work and how to avoid crashes that actually cause you to lose work and really, really be bummed out. This guy was bummed out. He posts a comment that was like, OpenToonz is such, blankety blank. It wasn't a very favorable comment about OpenToonz. So I somewhat snarkily, just goofing around, I said, so you're saying you don't like OpenToonz? I just put that right. And it was really kind of neat, because what happened was, because I answered his comment, he went from just complaining, OpenToonz is crap, to unpacking a little bit what had happened, where he was working very late at night and there was a crash, and and he was really open about where his frustration was coming from, because he's got a day job, he's doing this animation thing on his off time, which lots of people do, and it's just really frustrating, because you're trying to realize this creative vision to sort of maybe step into a chapter of your life that's better. That maybe this animation or storytelling thing is sort of a tool to be able to step into a better life situation in some way, maybe. Right? That's cool. And when you're at that emotional moment, when you've put all this work into the scene and then poof, your tool craps out on you, it can be really, really frustrating, especially if you're like super tired, you've been working really hard on it. And hey, Maria, good morning. So I was like, I can totally understand where the guy's coming from. And so I engaged with him back and forth a bit and gave him a few tips that I'm going to talk about a little bit today that I said, it was basically, my vibe was, don't get discouraged, take a deep breath, accept the fact that the crash happened, assess the situation, and be aware of a few key points about the way that OpenToonz saves stuff, because the likelihood is that you haven't lost your work. You've probably lost your Toonz file, but because it's corrupted, but the actual assets that you worked so hard on probably are right there on your hard drive. And so we went back and forth a couple times, and then what happened was, literally, the next morning, this guy was able to find all of the PLI files, which are your vector levels, and he was able to do exactly what I told him he probably would be able to do, which was rebuild the scene very, very quickly. He was able to completely get everything back and took a couple extra steps to safeguard that work so that if everything went south again later in the day, he had a fixed point that he knew he could get back to. So it all was a very happy ending. So what about vectors? Well, I have a little tick list that I'm going to go through talking about vectors. Okay. The first thing I want to say is that, as I mentioned earlier briefly, new users, and I'm creating a vector level right now, new users often gravitate to vectors. Okay. I think that the reason, and by the way, as far as the chat goes, yeah, I mean, both programs, OpenToonz and Tahoma, again, for me, they're interchangeable. They both crash. They both have problems with vectors. The problems are not as bad as they used to be. A year ago, trust me, it was worse. Most of the fill operation issues have been solved. It used to be that if I just, I probably need to actually make a couple changes here to my settings. And let's make our max size 1 so that we can actually draw lines that are visible. Okay, so I'm just going to draw a character here. In fact, I'll, since I'm working on this show, I'll go ahead and draw an outline that's kind of reminiscent of Golic. Okay, it used to be that what I'm about to do often didn't work, and it may not work now. So I'm doing a normal fill, boom. And indeed, it didn't work. There you go. So this is, I just turned on fill check, which I think works with vector levels. And so what we have here is a situation where the vector drawing that I just drew appears to not be a closed shape. Okay, so the problem may be here. My best option may be to do some erasing. And so I hit the eraser, and I want to be in normal mode, I think. Okay, the freehand erasing doesn't seem to work all that well. Okay, so now I actually have a question in my mind right now is, does the fill check tool work on vector levels? Because I'm pretty sure it does. So let's go to view, and this is not part of my discussion for today, but let's look at it. One thing you want to be aware of, so right now I have it in fill check mode. What does that mean? Well, that means if this is a properly closed shape, OpenToonz or Tahoma should signal me that it is a closed shape. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit the C key, which is how you can go in and edit your vector shapes. Okay, so now what should happen is when I put these two together, there we go. Now we see that the fill check tool has recognized this as a closed shape. So is this foolproof? Let's find out. Okay, now it's telling me it's filled, and I'm going to hit the fill tool and see what happens. And it did fill. Okay, so there was a time when that was a very sketchy operation and might not still work, where you could swear you had closed shapes on vector levels and they would not fill correctly. So, and that's been largely solved. I mean, the fill operations on vector levels are way better than they used to be. So Why do people gravitate to vectors? I think there's basically two reasons. One is editability, especially if you don't fancy yourself to be a great artist. It's nice to be able to do things like this. I'm hitting the S key, the selection tool, and I'm actually just manually cleaning this up. And so I'm not only refining the look of it, but I'm also putting myself in a better position performance-wise, because there's less nodes for OpenToonz or Tahoma to keep track of. And then you can use the Bezier handles like this to adjust them, or you can just grab it in the middle and adjust it this way. But as you can see by this, the way it moved right here, that usually doesn't work the greatest. Like in a program like Inkscape, it's better, because in Inkscape, what it does is it's going to, I actually don't know how to describe it. What really should have happened is these Bezier handles should have been dragged out more like that, right? So it's a little bit strong on the draw as far as grabbing a line segment and stretching it. Now, there may be a way to adjust that, but I am not aware of one. So normally, if I'm going to be adjusting, I'm going to actually grab the Bezier handles. And as you can see, that node right there didn't have a Bezier handle. So what you do is you just click on the line and move it a little bit, and then the Bezier handle appears. So it's kind of like OpenToonz or Tahoma is somewhat intelligently paying attention to whether you actually need the Bezier handles. Keep in mind, if you hit the control key, you can instantly create a new node, and that's the right way to do what I tried to do a minute ago. Okay, I was trying to do that. Okay, so for this segment right here, if that was a straight line, if I grab the line like this, I don't really love the way that is moving each of these locations. But if I hit control and actually create a node and move that, that's really more what I was looking for. And then you can grab the Bezier handles and fine tune it, and or delete to taste and use the Bezier handles again to create a very controlled bit of geometry with as few nodes as possible, right? Okay, so quick check on the chat. Okay, a lot of our happy birthday wishes for Claude, and you bought Rough Animator for yourself. Now, Rough Animator, I've heard of that. Is that a Rough Animator? I know I've heard. Oh, okay, it's a mobile app. Okay. Huh. Okay, cool. Have fun with that, man. Let us know how it goes. Okay, so back to work here. So there's two reasons I said that people gravitate to vectors, especially when they're newbies. And it's just something I've noticed over the years. And I'm thinking of something right now that I want to put a note on my notes here. So bear with me for half a second. There's another point about editing nodes or editing vectors that I wanted to make sure I mention. So editability is one reason why one might gravitate to vectors. Okay, you can see that by deleting this node, that broke the fill, and the reason is because this is where this shape joined itself. Is there a way to glue this together so it's actually a closed shape? You can find that out on your own, because actually I suspect there is, but I don't know for sure. So for my purposes, I'm not going to go too much further with that particular point. All right, but you can, as long as you're not killing the connection point, you can delete these nodes as much as possible, and then use the Bezier controls to really dial in the shape. In Golik's case, he kind of has a pointy, a prominent cheekbone, let's say, like that. That might be a little too prominent, but we'll just kind of roll with it here. So that editability is one reason. The other reason for gravitating to vectors, I think, is scalability. This vector, this is what it looks like rendered. And if I select the whole thing and resize it, as you can see, obviously a little piece of his ear got left behind. But what happens is it's going to remain sharp at all scales. So it means you can theoretically create assets that are reusable for a close-up, wide shot, whatever. So in that respect, absolutely, that is the big selling point of vector-based formats, and I'm sure it's one of the reasons why people gravitate to programs like Adobe Animate, the Blender Grease Pencil, or Toon Boom Harmony. Those are all vector-based programs, whereas your TV Paint tends to be a pixel-based program like an OpenToonz Smart Raster level. Clip Studio Paint, I think, kind of falls in the middle because they've got vectors and a pixel-based approach, but I would say that it tends to favor, it's more mature when it comes to the pixel-based approach. Krita also falls in the middle. You can create vector levels and edit stuff that you cut and paste from Inkscape, for example, in the SVG format. But most of the animation favors, again, a pixel-based approach. Okay? So that's that. So why do we like vectors? Well, we can scale them and we can edit them. So even if I can't draw very well, especially if I have a background image on my screen that I'm tracing, it's easier for me to get a really beautiful, crisp piece of art that I can go use in 15 different animated scenes using vectors. Theoretically, that is the benefit. Okay. So that's understandable. I want to point out right now, because it's next on my list, a crash that I have seen happen multiple times in the last 2 weeks, specifically with vector levels in Tahoma2D and or I'm not sure about OpenToonz. So I'm going to go ahead and save all. I'm going to just save this as vector demo. We'll call it vector demo. Okay. So now with my luck, it won't happen. But what has occurred multiple times over the last couple of weeks is I have a vector level, I click on an empty cell, and I begin to draw. And now it doesn't crash. Go figure. That's the first time it hasn't crashed. What I've noticed is, let's try another vector level here from scratch where I only use the brush. Okay, so I'm just going to draw a shape. And now I'll bet you it still won't crash. Okay, I think I've identified the problem, actually, believe it or not. Here's the thing. Most times, let me get you on another reason why I like vectors, actually. One of the things I like about vectors is we can go auto close, auto group, auto fill, which means you can just draw a shape like this, and I use a pen. What's the cheapest one I can get? Max, I'm using, I don't know what's the cheapest. If you go to a standard tablet, you can get a pretty nice one. I mean, I've got one over there that I use on the laptop sometimes. That's like, it's like an 8x11 drawing area, so it's pretty big. It's an XP pen, and it was like $30. I mean, it was pretty cheap. You can get them down to, if you're willing to have a. I'm waiting. Okay, so their OBS is reconnected. Okay, so, but that's about a 3. Oh my God, OBS just disconnected again. So OBS is disconnecting every 2 seconds, unfortunately. That stinks. Digital Artist XP Pen 15.6 is an old device now. It's a couple years old, so you could probably pick one up on eBay for $100 or something. Initially, I think it was about a $300 to $350 type of item. So, whatever reason, I mean, and it literally just disappears. The program just poof, gone. It's happened multiple times. I reported it on the Discord, and now, as luck would have it, the day that I'm talking about vectors, I can't recreate the bug. So that's just the way it goes sometimes. So let's get back to the discussion at hand. This harkens back to my discussion with my subscriber who had the issue. When you just save early, save often is what I always say, and that's basically the rule. If you save your scene, the only thing that gets saved is the TNZ file. That's a little problematic because OpenToonz' normal procedure is to take each of these individual levels that you create and saves them as separate files on your hard drive in known locations. Okay? So that means if it's a vector level, it's going to get saved in the drawings folder for your current project as a PLI file. Vector levels, PLI file. If it's a smart raster level, which obviously is a pixel type of drawing, it's going to get saved as a TLV file. But the point is, they all get saved separately. Okay? And so you want to make sure when you save, especially when you're just getting started on a scene, you want to save all. Because when you save all, it saves the Toonz file, but it also saves each of the individual levels, all out to your hard drive. And then when OpenToonz or Tahoma acts stupid and crashes, actually, you can reopen a new scene and normally just go reload the levels that you had drawn right back into a new scene, and you can generally recreate your work in a matter of like 5 minutes. It usually is not a big deal. Well, I want to say to Nate-san, you know, as you probably remember the discussion we had with Claude the other day, where I gave him a bit of a rant. I think that Claude is right now. He's in that place where he's exploring the tools that he wants and what he likes. I think he's trying to figure out what his tool of choice is, and it isn't necessarily, he's not ready to commit hardcore to OpenToonz or Tahoma. And that's fine, especially if he's doing a lot of work on a tablet. If he wants to work on a tablet, obviously looking at Flip-a-Clip and is going to default to the root folder, typically, of your current project. Okay? So the drawings folder is a folder that OpenToonz created for me. The extras folder is a folder that OpenToonz created for me. All my raster assets, in other words, stuff that I cut and paste from Krita, for example, background paintings, things like that, they get saved in the extras folder. Why it's called extras, I have no idea. It doesn't really matter, but that's where it saves it. Unless you specifically tell it to save it somewhere else. Okay, so I should come back and show that. You can grab this level, and if you go to your level settings, I believe, let's go to your level settings. Right here, I guess you can't do it once it's created and saved, but when you create a new level, you can specify where to save it if you want to, and give it an intelligent name. You know, so that makes it even easier if there's a crash, you know, to get it back. But your extras folder is going to contain just your pixel art, you know. And your drawings folder is where OpenToonz or Tahoma is going to save your smart raster levels and your vector levels. So if you look through here, you're going to see TLV. There's a TLV level. There's a TLV level. If I go ahead and right mouse click and hit load, then this shot from a much earlier scene gets loaded into the current scene. And that's a great way to reuse assets. So again, that's why people tend to gravitate to vectors, is because of reuse, right? So if we go back here, I would think, let me double check here, but I think I just saw it right there. So there is the PLI file, PLI, for the vector level that I just created. It's right there. And if OpenToonz were to crash, and again, just to be clear, guys, I'm using the word OpenToonz and Tahoma completely interchangeably. Because in my experience, everything about them is exactly the same, basically. Because let's face it, the whole interface is customizable anyway. So if I loaded up OpenToonz right now, which I have OpenToonz 1.5 on my system, and I agree with Claude. It's really, actually what I do is I do it on paper. So if you get the latest OpenToonz, you've got the drawing window or the drawing room, which these rooms are totally customizable and you can create new ones, as many as you want, blah, blah, blah. But OpenToonz out of the gate favors the horizontal timeline. Okay? So I downloaded this the other day and haven't customized it yet. Right? And there hasn't been a big reason to. Frankly, if I was using OpenToonz right now, I'd probably be in the X sheet room mostly, because I tend to like to draw in the X sheet or draw I don't mind having a smaller screen, and then I just am kind of adjusting animation data all at the same time. But again, I can't emphasize enough, for my purposes, OpenToonz, Tahoma, same thing. They're just, one's a fork of the other, and they're always catching up with each other in terms of the development, right? So new features appear over here, they tend to appear over there, right, on the next release. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Back to vectors. Okay, so I've already mentioned autosave, and save all is the other thing I wanted to mention. If you have any doubts about that you're going to forget to save stuff, and gosh, you guys that are here today, this might be stuff you guys all already know. I mean, but when you go into your preferences, you can set autosave, save automatically. I haven't been using it because if I do any operation that I know is mission critical, for me it's become pretty much a habit. I don't even think about it. I just hit Control S. And for me, I think this is the normal default, is that Control S doesn't save the scene, it saves everything. So with vector levels, what I tend to do is, like, if I'm going to start drawing on another level, I actually save before I do that, because that's when it's going to crash, if it's going to crash. Okay. But now this kind of gets back to the whole vectors vis-a-vis Claude's comment. Yes, symbols, right. If you're in Flash or Adobe Animate, of course they call them symbols. But yes, this is what I'm trying to show you guys today. If you want to create scalable assets that you can sit there and really dial them in, right, and make them perfect, hit the C key. The C key lets you go in here, and like, for all these nodes are completely unnecessary. You know, for the purpose of creating a reusable asset, what I really want to do is this. And the truth of the matter is that the actual vector editing in OpenToonz or Tahoma is very, very, very good. It's very strong. And the other thing I'm going to mention right now that I just put on my list a few minutes ago is the tire pump tool, because what the tire pump tool does is it really lets you dial in the look of your art. So what do I mean by that? Well, if I hit the tire pump, I can now take an area right here, and I can really start, you know, if I'm going for that, you know, Kim Possible type of look, you know, that you see all the time on like Nickelodeon, absolutely you can do that. You know, you can really dial it in. The only thing about this that's a little on the clunky side is it's not super easy to, I mean, you have to stop and go like this if you want to change the strength of the tool, right? If you want to dial into a really small area. What I've found is somewhere in this 20 range seems to be about right most of the time. But I mean, for somebody that's looking at Toon Boom Harmony, I should think that this is one of the reasons they'd be looking at it, is this ability to just go in and create your assets. And now when I save all, I'm going to save all, and when I go back, it's going to take a second to save. And you can see it's still thinking. You know, save all takes a second because it's saving each of those individual files if they have changed. But now if I go ahead and reload this, you'll see that we get a second copy of the same exact PLI file that I'm working on. So reusability in OpenToonz is not a problem. Now if I wanted to change this just for completeness, I'll say this. My actual level strip, as you can see when I reloaded it, there were 3 frames because I drew these other 2. So, but I could go in and delete those extras if I want to really clean things up. Hit the S key, the selection tool, to go ahead and grab this and get rid of it because this wasn't actually needed. And now when I hit Control S to save all, I'll bet you any amount of money we'll let it save, and then I'll show you. I'll bet you that if I delete this, go back to my browser, and then reload this level, wango bango, there it is, and now there's only 1 frame. So this gets to kind of the problem that my subscriber had with the issue he ran into is I wanted to illustrate that if you're willing to be patient with it and save your work often, no question that vector levels are extremely powerful. Now I like to draw more than model or construct usually, right? So that's why I tend to use the brush and not the geometry tool. You guys can explore the permutations of the geometry tool to your heart's desire, because you've got a bunch of sub-tools, you know, like the multi-arc, the polyline. If you were going to create this one from scratch, using the polyline would be a great way to do it. Here's how you do it. You'd go click, click, click. You just draw this really simple geometric shape. I used to do this in Anime Studio all the time when I was creating characters, when I used to use Anime Studio Pro. You just go like this and then close it. Okay. What that probably did not close. It didn't. Okay, so now I'm going to hit the C key and just make sure that this is, well, okay, it's treating it as a closed shape. So this could be another bug, arguably. Okay. That was kind of not so much a bug as a quirk. What happened was it did close the shape when I finished it, but it didn't show it as closed until I went into edit mode and actually made sure they were touching each other. So I don't call that a bug, I call that a quirk, right? The only problem I have with vectors in OpenToonz is the fill bucket with vector. Well, correct, and I mentioned that earlier, Nate-san. What I have found is that with recent versions of OpenToonz or Tahoma, the bucket fill works pretty darn well. Now you can safeguard your efforts by turning on the fill check tool, because if the fill check tool says you have closed shapes, what I found is generally it works. But let's just try and see if we can break this. I'm going to use the polyline tool again, and I'm going to turn on snap. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is it's going to snap to this line, and then I'm just going to go like this. That snapped as well. And then I just hit enter to stop. Now what we should see is theoretically what we have now is two closed shapes, right? Because it did snap, and let's find out what happens. Because as you're alluding to, this has been traditionally a buggy thing. Okay, so according to Tahoma, at least in this case, everything's working the way we expect it to. Now if you go about creating characters in this way, it's a pretty safe way to do it, because you're making sure everything snaps, you're using very simple geometry, and now by not using the brush tool, you haven't created a ton of extra nodes that weigh down your scene for no good reason, right? So in my case, what I would do here is I'd grab the C key and just start dragging these around. Okay, see right there, there's no good reason why moving this node here should have broken the fill characteristic of the shape. And as you can see, it keeps changing its mind back and forth. Are we fillable or are we not fillable? It can't seem to decide. Okay? Get used to it, because what we're seeing right here is something that's real normal with Tahoma or OpenToonz vector levels. What's my advice? I'll show you what my advice is. If I was really going to build characters in Tahoma or OpenToonz for a real workflow, I mean, here I've got a show where I've done 48 minutes of animation. Okay, so if I'm trying to do a big project and I have to depend on vector levels, this is what I would do. I would create and save them all the time as outlines only. Okay? I would have a palette of colors ready to go for my fill operations. And then what I would do is I would do my scaling. In other words, I would load up a character and then scale them into the scene. So what would happen in practice is this is what I would save on my hard drive as a PLI file. Then I would go in, I would bring this into my new scene. I would simply scale it to the size I need for the shot I'm working on, move it into place, and then this is the key step. I'm going to convert this, and I got to remember if it's the header, the column, or the level menu. Here we have convert. Convert vectors to smart raster. If I convert this to a smart raster level, what happens is a new smart raster level gets created, and you're not going to have any of those fill issues on this level. You will not. I'm going to promise you and tell you and show you right now this is going to work fine. So you just work with the Toonz raster levels on the actual scene, but you create your library of assets as vector elements. That's a great way to do it. And it's very fault tolerant. You're going to not be losing a lot of work. You get all the benefits of scalability. And if you wanted to, you say, well, okay, but this doesn't look exactly the way I wanted. Okay, fine. Go in here, take your tire pump tool, and get it dialed in before you do the conversion, right? No big deal. Dial it in, dial it in. And now one thing I haven't even touched on is the fact that you can, let me look here. Why my, when I click away, this window is disappearing. I have absolutely no idea why that is occurring. Just so you know, folks. So we're always uncovering something or other that seems a little weird. And that's a phenomenon I've never seen before. And frankly, it's the kind of thing that makes me want to restart Tahoma. I get the guy's frustration because as a creative person, you just want to be creative. You want to, as a creative person, you want to depend on your tools so that you're not fighting with your tools and they don't become a barrier to your creativity where all of your time is spent compensating for the weaknesses of your tool and you feel like you're not actually spending your time being creative. And then that situation becomes even worse when you've spent a bunch of time, and with the danger, and it's happened to me a million times, is you actually get into the zone. So you're being creative, you're having fun, you're creating stuff, and then boom, you've forgotten to save your work and you've just lost 2 hours of the best work you ever did. Right? How frustrating is that? That's where setting autosave is probably good policy. In my case, I've just gotten in the habit of every time I do something that I wouldn't want to lose, I typically save my work. So now I did that a moment ago, and now what I'm going to do is close Tahoma and reopen it and see if the paint bucket comes back. So my point with this part of the talk was this. I understand the frustration of that, but I wanted to demonstrate how useful the vector levels are, because the problem that I mean, to a degree, Claude's exploring this right now, but this other user certainly is. The problem is, what I've learned is, see, now this is back. I've learned two things. One is that tool that you're looking for that's so reliable does not exist, okay? There is no tool that's actually got the capabilities to do what you have in your head, that's deep enough and powerful enough. There is no tool that will get you there that doesn't come with a lot of potential drawbacks, gotchas, bugs. There is no such tool. And trust me, guys, I've used them all. I've tried them all. Sometimes I don't like them because of their interface. Sometimes I don't like them because they're not reliable. But usually, again, back to what Claude is exploring, you do need to go to this process. In other words, don't choose your tool because you say, oh, well, OpenToonz sucks because it crashes. Because every program crashes. What you want to do is choose the tool that you enjoy using, you know, and do a little homework. Make sure the feature set, you know, is adequate to what you're trying to accomplish. But then be aware that you are going to have a learning curve, probably at least a month. And number two, you are going to have crashes and bugs and problems. Read the docs. Take the time. Pay the price. Pay the price of actually learning your tool. What you're going to discover when you pay the price is two things. Number one, I am able to do what I have in my head. And number two, it ain't the perfect tool. It crashes, it's stupid, it does crazy things, it doesn't work quite the way I wanted. There are no exceptions. I'm not necessarily expert level with Blender anymore, although there was a time when I was. But I'm competent with Blender. I am an expert with OpenToonz, and I am an expert with Krita. And yet there's still stuff that I bump into and learn every single day. It is. Max is right. A month is a low-end estimate. I just remember back in about between 1999 and 2000, when I first learned Blender. I first discovered Blender. I had, as I mentioned the other day, I had thousands of dollars into 3D Studio Max. And even with that investment, the character animation tools in Max were not even close to adequate. Nothing like what you had in Maya. But at that time, just to get in with Maya was a $10,000 investment. You know, for something that I'm just poking at. It didn't make sense. I had reasonably good luck with Animation Master, Hash Animation Master. TrueSpace, which was actually a client of mine back when TrueSpace was a thing. Ultimately, I'm happy for Roman and I think it was Bibiana Gaspari. Roman and Bibiana, I think that was her name. They wound up selling out to Microsoft, so I think they did pretty well. And that was the end of TrueSpace, because basically Microsoft buried it, I think. But yeah, and I discovered Blender, and as I recall, Max, it took about a month of really painful experimenting and learning to bone up on Blender. And then what happened was, and I remember it now that I'm talking about it, what actually happened was I spent several weeks with Blender and got frustrated and quit. And it was kind of like a little, that's right, Sifter, you don't. That's why I say with Blender today, I'm just competent. I'm not an expert, I'm competent. And if I want to get something done, especially with the grease pencil, I generally can do it. And there's many shots in the show that were done with the Blender grease pencil. Not a ton of them, but there's plenty. So if you're really, really, really all about vectors, you really are all about vectors, but yet you like to draw too, then the Blender grease pencil, and this, you know, it's something you really ought to be looking at of the three, only because the ecosystem for Krita for animators is pretty poor. If you're a painter, there's a great ecosystem surrounding Krita, you know, for digital painting. Okay, so I think I've said what I wanted to say about the emotional side of it. I totally get it. I've been that guy. It's really frustrating sometimes when you just want to do your work. You just want to go. Just go. And then the tool disappoints you and lets you down in some way. It happens all the time, and it's been a long process for me to really accept that and just hedge against it by saving early and saving often. The good news about OpenToonz is that, and I mentioned this again to that subscriber, is actually OpenToonz is one of the most fault-tolerant softwares I have ever used. It might be the most fault-tolerant. Meaning, A, when it acts stupid, usually if you just close it and reopen it, everything sort of resets and works. What just happened a minute ago with this? Why did this disappear? We're never going to know. But I reopened Tahoma and there it is again. Everything's back to normal. And number two, because it does save out those levels on your hard drive separately, whether you knew it or not, they were being saved separately for you. And because of that, when everything crashes and goes to pot, you can usually rebuild it very, very quickly. And you might discover the same thing I've discovered, which I actually ran into here just the other day, is that when you have to rebuild a shot, normally you do a better job on it the second time. So you wind up not crying. And, you know, you don't cry as much. I used to cry a lot more when, not literally, but, you know, used to complain a lot more for sure, rant. There have been plenty of rants on this channel over the months. But, okay, so Krita 5 will turn out great for animation. Sifter, I disagree. They'll overhaul the animation UI and introduce F curves for translation and rotation. Okay, so I suspect that you're wrong. So let's have a bet. I'll bet you $1. Of course, I don't know how we'd pay that. I'll just bet you. I'll bet you that you're wrong. I'm betting that Krita 5 is going to take until Krita 6 to actually be what we're all hoping Krita 5 is going to be. I've looked at it. The development, and by the way, my discussion of vectors for today is basically over. So I'm going to address Sifter's comment about Krita, and then we're going to get busy on the next shot, which is pretty much probably going to be a painting job. You'll see why shortly. This is what I think is going on with Krita 5. I downloaded the pre-release, the alpha. It's as I expect. You know, they basically took out the F curves for layer transparency. So if you go into Krita, and let's just open up a shot. If you go into Krita, right now you have the ability to create an animation F curve for turning up or down the transparency of a layer over time. And it's the only thing that you can animate in that way with, you know, with interpolated tween, actually make Krita useful for animation beyond what it already is, are actually part of the development going forward. That means that the stuff they're talking about is going to be coming slowly, it's going to be buggy, and it's going to take at least a year before it's actually useful to where you're not going, oh my God, I could do my work better in, you know, version 4.4.3. Okay, now we'll see if you're right or I'm right, but I'll bet you that's what's going to happen. I will say this, if I could speak to the developers, this is what I would tell them. If you were going to do one thing to make, let me say this. Here's the crazy thing about Krita when it comes to animation. Krita it's like a football game where you are on the 99-yard line. You've only got 1 yard to go to get a touchdown, and you keep fumbling the ball. You keep fumbling the ball, and you lose your opportunity right at the moment that you're about to cross the finish line, so to speak. That's Krita when it comes to animation. Why do I say that? Here's why. Everything they need to make animation in Krita awesome. See, what happens with Krita 5 is the whole ecosystem, the whole culture starts talking about the coming new features. And, oh, it's going to be so great. Oh, it's going to be so exciting. Yada, 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 yada. And then it's always a disappointment. I'm not saying that to be snarky. I'm saying that as clinically as I can, that's what I've seen the pattern is over and over and over and over. Okay? What they've all missed, they've a zoom shot. You know, I want to be able to just do an animated zoom where I push the camera in, for example, or pan over a wider, I want to pan over a large background. Okay? How would you do that? You'd simply use the animate tool, which we already have, and what happens with Krita, the only thing required, literally the only thing required, is for Krita to remember the previous setting. The last time you used the transform tool, just when you go back to use it again, don't reset all the parameters, but actually remember the prior setting. That's already true with filters, but it's not with tools, at least not with the translation tool. So if you just had the ability to remember the previous setting, then you could set like a 5% scale, and then you just repeat it over multiple frames. You know, keeps increasing 5%, and boom, you just created a zoom. You know, stuff like that. I could show you probably 5 or 10 different things that are already in the software if it wasn't stupid in this regard, basically, because to me, I consider that stupid. The idea that a tool doesn't as well, you know, it's got all this kind of stuff, right? You can stretch it. Okay, implement the translation tool as a filter. That's all you need. Because all the filters have the capability we want as well, which is to be able to set a preset. You just create a preset that you keep repeating, or you hit Control F to keep repeating the last filter. So if the translation tool was a filter, or if the translation tool remembered its prior settings, problem solved. And then somebody else will say to me, well, yeah, Dave, well, you can kind of do that because you can program Krita with Python. Wrong. It turns out that the exact parameters that you need to access in the Python API that would actually make animation useful happens to be, right now, the only part of Krita that is not easily accessible through the Python API. I'm not joking. I've looked into it. I spent quite a lot of time looking into it, trying to do it with Python scripting. I've done plenty of coding in my time. And what it turns out, at every point where they could take the animation and Krita to the next level without having to have a major new, you know, release version 5, a simple, stable, incremental improvement that would be a huge improvement. is right in front of their eyes and they're not seeing it. So there it is. That's my opinion, and I'm going to hold to it strongly. And by the way, it's the reason why what I've learned to do with actually the very shot we were just looking at. This entire shot was done in Krita, and when it was time to animate, what I did was I took each one of these levels and just cut and pasted each of the cells into Tahoma, and I did all the animation in Tahoma. The process of getting all the actual animated content, everything, from Krita to Tahoma took about 10 minutes. It was really fast. So that's why I use Tahoma and not OpenToonz, is because I can cut and paste from Krita. That's literally the only reason I use Tahoma. So you might ask this question. If you've got the plastic tool and you've got the ability to parent levels to each other, you've got sub scenes so you can consolidate your work in intelligent ways, why would you ever animate in Krita? At this point, my answer to that is stuff like this. Number one would actually be the liquefy tool, the ability to do this, squash stuff around and then on additional frames like this. It gives you a level of control that you can't get with the plastic tool typically. Okay, so the liquefy tool is one reason, and then the other reason is that if I group stuff up like this, and then I add a level, and then maybe just grab my, let's hit the B key and just grab my airbrush over the next frame and add drawing more stuff, you know, so like an explosion, for example. That stuff's pretty easy and fun to do in Krita. So that's basically the quick and dirty thing is pretty much where I still come back to Krita, but what I found in practice is it's not that big of a benefit. Here's why. Because I can achieve the same thing in Tahoma by going Control C, and then I jump back to Tahoma, I go Control V. There's my gradient, and now it literally takes me no time at all. I go into the effects schematic. There's my gradient. There's my output. I add an layer blending INO overlay. I put my scene here, and I put my gradient there. And not only have I recreated what I just did in Krita, as you can, you can only see it right here because there's nothing else, there's nothing to color with the gradient, but you know, so it clearly is working. But I was able to not only create that in Tahoma, basically the layer blending modes and whatnot that you have in Krita, this is how you do it in Tahoma. And not only that, but you could set up these nodes as a macro to reuse over and over and over and over. So, you know, you kind of only have to do it once, and then you can reuse it in future scenes. So, kind of powerful, right? Hence, in the last month, I've actually gone back to Krita to do a shot once. One time. And it was this shot, and ultimately, because of some weirdness over here in Krita, which I don't even remember what it was now, I actually wound up cutting and pasting all the cells back into Tahoma and reconstituting the scene there. And now getting back to what I started with when I was talking about vectors, if I do that, if I hit save all now, which I just did, that gradient that I created in Krita automatically gets saved in my extras folder for my current project, which is cool. So it's really easy to create stuff in any paint program that you like, any paint program, doesn't matter what it is. In fact, with the way Tahoma does it, I really like it because between Krita and Tahoma, as far as I'm concerned, everything. And it's just that recently I haven't needed to go back to Krita too often. So that's that. All right, now that I'm waiting for OBS to reconnect, and their OBS is reconnected. Sorry about the stream delays. It's really not my fault, and it's not your fault either. It's an OBS thing. Okay, so let me look here. Adobe Animate is $100 less than OpenToonz Professional Companion. Toonz Premium is forever in US dollars. Okay, right. I will say this, Claude. You can weigh in with a comment if you know. But my question would be, I am not aware. What is the reason why someone would purchase Toonz Premium? today? Why would you buy Toonz Premium instead of using OpenToonz? If you know the answer, I have literally no idea. Okay, Autodesk makes $2 million a year from their apps, and Blender does a lot of things better than Maya and 3ds Max, and it's free. I completely agree. I completely agree. I think that the advantage that 3ds Max and Maya have mostly to do with the fact that they're already very powerfully embedded in the entertainment industry, which is an extremely small group of people, actually. If you look at the money that Autodesk makes from Maya and Max combined, it's an order of magnitude less money than they make from AutoCAD. They make way more money in the industrial design sector than they will ever make in the entertainment sector. Kind of a fact that probably most people that are into special effects and whatnot don't realize, but that's true. But you're right. Blender does a better, or certainly does an equal job on character animation, rigging, post-production. Obviously, you got the grease pencil now. I mean, it's crazy. And to Nate-san's point, I think, nothing wrong with Autodesk making money. You know, they're out there trying to compete. Blender Foundation makes a crap ton of money, but they do it differently. I think that Ton Rosendahl has done a brilliant job of guiding the Blender Foundation to a position where it can support the livelihood of many of the people that are involved with it and provide a support structure for the development of Blender. I can't say enough good about Ton. I think he's a great guy. Toon Boom might be more than $2,000, but at least you can have it forever for that price. Mine 3ds Max is more than twice that price for 3 whole years. Well, I mean, obviously Toon Boom is a very different kind of thing than than Blender, or I'm sorry, 3ds Max or Maya. And Maya to 3D animation is what Toon Boom is to 2D animation. Well, yeah, and you could argue that, Claude, if you really think that Harmony is the creme de la creme, then I think you probably can't afford it right now, would be my guess, because I know you were looking at finding like a crack or whatever. You know that most studios like Pixar have their own tools, so it's mid-range studios that use it the most. Yep, exactly. That's true. Well, like ILM as well developed a lot of their own tools back in the day, and they were working closely with Pixar. Actually, early in the days when the Pixar was actually a piece of hardware, a rendering machine, back in the late 80s, I suppose. Yeah, a lot of custom software development in the ILM space. And that's where Photoshop came from. I mean, Thomas Knoll is the brother of John Knoll, and Tom wrote Photoshop, and John Knoll worked closely with George Lucas for decades, and so they were the early Photoshop adopters because they actually created it. And then actually somebody I know, Mark Hamburg, who I went to high school with, became the guy that shepherded Photoshop from being a very new and probably crude program in some ways, and Mark, working for Adobe, guided Photoshop to what it became. And so I have to compliment Mark Hamburg. I wish I could say my friend Mark Hamburg. He and I are Facebook friends now, but back in high school I treated him like dirt. I mean, I was a real jerk in high school, and in some ways, and Mark and I didn't like each other at all. But he went on to have a fabulous career. Anyway, okay, in DreamWorks 3D animation pretty much free, and Pixar makes their render industry. Well, I mean, obviously, Renderman's been free for, and plus there are 3 free versions of Renderman. It's really about learning the Renderman language, because you're talking about actually coding shaders. And I think nowadays, if people want to code shaders, they're probably looking at the game industry, and they're looking at coding shaders that are targeting the GPU. I'm sure that there's products out there that serve as an intermediate space between the GPU and the Renderman shading language as well. Frankly, what Blender's doing in terms of their rendering engine is OMG state of the art. The EV engine is ridiculous. I mean, it's real time, absolutely photoreal, node based, completely procedural. How do you criticize that? You know, I don't know. I don't know how you criticize that. Okay, so let's get to work. It's been an hour, a little over. We probably lost 10 minutes to stupid OBS. Hiccups. But I'll just save all because it's fun to save your work. All right, so what we need to do now that we're actually getting into actual work is I'm going to take 1 second right now and make sure, as you guys know, we've been monitoring the market very closely. We've got a bunch of stocks that we've been doing a certain amount of buying and selling. And I'm just looking at my alerts, and it appears to me that Valerie's pretty much on it. And oh my gosh, has she been doing a really good job of guiding the ship. She's been doing a smoking job, I must say. Been so proud of her. It's been quite a learning curve. Anyway, what do we got? Let's go over here, and we're entering this new situation. So Mel has realized that the letter is missing, and it fades out. Probably it's going to fade to black, not white. But then, boom, now we're into the wedding situation. So what we have here is an establishing shot, but there is some animation required. What I'm going to do is, frankly, there's 3 ways we can go. Let's go over here and look at it here. There's 3 ways we can go. Well, okay, Nate-san, I'll comment about your comment. The special effects and CGI animation industry, the actual industry, you know, where real people are doing real work every day, is vanishingly small. It's a very small community, actually. They've always benefited from making certain tools free for 2 reasons. Because the big movies are made using those tools, people want to be able to learn those tools. And they're kind of doing the same thing Steve Jobs did with Apple, with the Mac and schools back in the, I suppose, late 80s or whatever, which is that if young people that are into this stuff learn that tool, then they're actually creating their own encroaching job market. They're actually facilitating the new people that are going to enter the workplace and be able to do good work, you know, because they know the tools. So there's a real advantage to making those tools free. They're not going to make any money on those tools anyway. That's what I'm saying. It's such a small community that what you find is for every seat of Maya that someone actually pays for, there's probably hundreds of thousands, if not into the millions of people that download a cracked version. At the end of the day, they're not really harmed by the crack. Why? Because number one, the people that use the cracked version are never going to buy it. They're not ready to. They don't have the money. Okay? And number two, they're going to learn the software so that when they're ready to enter the marketplace, they are going to buy it. Or they're going to be a useful contributor to a company that's using that tool that has invested in it. So it is what it is. The software tools themselves as a profit center pretty much suck as a business. You know, ask the guys that created Lightwave. I mean, there was a brief period of time there where they kind of had you know, they were in the money there for a little while in the 90s. But basically as a profit center, the software tools to create CGI are not much of a business, frankly. So I think, and let's face it, look at the Blender. But I think the other day when these issues came up, what I said to Claude was, from everything I see, from everything he has said, I think if I was his father and was going to advise him, I would say stop everything and go learn Blender and pay the price of learning Blender, because it sounds like everything you're trying to achieve in terms of your creative path, Blender solves it for you in a big way. So my advice to Claude was go learn Blender. But, you know, that's not my choice. That's Claude's choice. So anyway, we've got this big scene, and what I was trying to say before I was so rudely interrupted by myself is that we could actually do this in Krita as a painting. We could do it in Tahoma as a vector level, or we could do it in Tahoma as a painting. So I would say a painting makes more sense in Tahoma with vector levels. Probably makes more sense, because then what we can do is we can create the basic shapes of this architecture just as closed vector shapes. We can then use transparent black or white to take the local color of each of these elements and just kind of dial them in, give them a little bit of simple shading. And then if we wanted to, we could use a raster level overlaid over the top of that, perhaps in a subscene, you know, basically combined together in a subscene, to paint some detail in. Probably the people should not be baked into the background, because I suspect that this architecture is going to have to be reused. Another reason, by the way, to use vectors. And then we're going to want to come up with a simplistic way to indicate this crowd in the foreground. And there's sort of some conventions with anime about that, where actually just drawing really simple, stupid shapes is not a horrible way to go in terms of, you know, you're just trying to convey that it feels like a crowd. Remember, in the Phantom Menace, the big crowd during the pod race was actually colored Q-tips. So go back and watch that movie. All of the people in the crowd were Q-tips that were dipped in paint to give them a little bit of color. Yeah, that's a fact. So my friend in high school is making a film series called War Dogs with Blender. Good. Independent film series. Great. Sounds like fun. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I am going to cut and paste this image into Tahoma. And so now we're going to get into actual real-world workflow. Okay? So we cut and pasted that from Sony Vegas, from our timeline, the storyboard, if you will, into Tahoma. And now I'm immediately going to save this as shot number 581. Actually, I'm going to do one other thing first. I'm going to change my output settings. My output settings would be the following. This is just my convention. I'm going to go plus scenes, so it's going to be put in the scenes folder. And then this is going to be shot number 581, so I'm going to give it a folder called 581, and then within that folder there's going to be another folder called render. And then this is going to be 581. So the actual images are going to be numbered 581 dot, then 4 digits. Now I'm not actually going to save and render right now, because at this point I don't know how long the image sequence is going to be. But now what I'm going to do is save all as 581. And then what's going to happen is not only is the Toonz file 581 going to be created, but also this drawing is now going to be saved in my extras folder. So if I needed to get back to it or wanted to, I mean, let's face it, the reality is if I wanted to, I could just start painting over this. You know, let's ponder that approach for a moment. Okay, so the basic disadvantage. Let me make this 0, so this is like the default size for the brush. Maybe let's do -1 and see what we get. That's probably better. Okay, so let's just think about this. I'm gonna consider doing this with a standard raster level. As I recall, the roof of this building was red. I don't know that green is such a bad idea as far as the... I'm going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and paint into this. Just because I'm just kind of feeling like Okay, so, and I've already bumped into something. Okay, so now what I'm seeing is, this is actually a good real world example of what you run into where you do something, then you stop and immediately realize your strategy is wrong. The problem here is that this would be way better in Krita, because then what I could do is I could turn on, well, actually strike that. Let me check one thing here. Okay, you guys may not be aware of this, but be aware that you do have lock alpha on an OpenToonz raster level that's using the MyPaint brushes, which I usually do. If you use the MyPaint brushes, you can do a lock alpha. In this case, it doesn't quite work. Why? Because actually there is no alpha in this painting. This is already filled with white. So lock alpha doesn't help. Now, if I use my eraser to create a transparent area like this, okay, it still looks white, obviously. But if I go back to my brush, the lock alpha allows me to do this. I can paint into these zones. I can create these zones and actually control how I paint into them. So that gives you kind of, sort of, to a degree, the benefit of layers within an OpenToonz raster level. So that's just something I wanted to point out because it is definitely pretty useful. The main disadvantage here is that when I cut stuff out and create a bunch of alpha within it, where it makes sense to do so, I actually can't tell that it happened. So there's a fix. Why don't we do this? Let's create a vector level here. And just to make our life easier, what we'll do is we'll hit the B key and just create a vector level that's black. Just create a closed shape like this. Okay, now I can see where my transparent areas are. Okay, and that kind of works. Now, for doing backgrounds, the cool thing, if you're like into your paint programs with your blending modes and all the stuff I talked about with Krita earlier, a really good strategy in Tahoma or OpenToonz would be to create your background with whatever levels of whatever type you need to sort of build up your painting, and then just save them together. Grab whatever levels are part of it and turn them into a sub X sheet. So now your background painting just becomes a single level, and if you need to go down into it, so to speak, you can go down into the sub X sheet, or the sub scene as Tahoma calls it, and go ahead and start dealing individually with your levels again. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually copy this. So I'm going to take this painting. Yep. And I'm going to recopy this. And by the way, guys, basically what you're seeing here today is this is the real-time creative process of I'm really thinking out loud about what I'm doing, and I'm making it up as I go along, very much so. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and just turn this level off and hit save all. So all I just did was create a backup copy of the storyboard drawing because I'm painting directly into this copy of it, right? Okay. His computer almost exploded. I can beat that, Claude. The machine I work on here all the time has 12 processors. 85 frames per second. Right, so he's going for that high speed. He's basically putting the bullet in slow motion. Super slow motion, probably. But that would be pretty easy to do. Why? What would be difficult about that, I'm not quite sure. Unless what you mean is that he's actually trying to get the computer to crank out the rendering of 85 frames a second, which of course I've never heard of anybody accomplishing. Even with 12 cores, I don't think I could do that. Don't look at my IMDb page. That would show you all kinds of things that you might not want to know. I'm kidding. Okay, so I'm going to turn lock alpha back off. And now what I'm going to do is, actually, because I saved the painting, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of judicious chiseling like this, because I'm going to assume that there's probably going to be a gradient back there, but basically I want to delineate this edge. So obviously that's pretty asymmetrical. It's amazing how something can look pretty good in a sketch, but then when you actually start tightening up the artwork, you realize how really sloppy it actually is. So this is definitely pretty sloppy. It's not horrible, but it's not great either. So this is kind of positioned wrong. I wonder if we could just like maybe drag this, which is of course going to create some more alpha. And then I'll be painting back over into that. But obviously you've got the same situation over here. So I'm just kind of looking at this arc right here, which again will have to be touched up by hand. Alright, so I'm going to take the eraser and again just erase into this. Okay, so I've got a dual benefit here now. I can paint with lock alpha on or off. So right now I'm going to leave it off, because I want to actually start blocking in the stage. Okay, so we got this stage. It's kind of an oval, and you know, again, it's going to be a little bit rough, but we'll just kind of, you know, let's have fun doing some painting today, right? I don't care about the characters right now. Just want to get the kind of the infrastructure of the environment. And I'm doing it by hand with a bit of scribbling deliberately, trying to keep it loose, keep it painterly, I suppose. And this is not the most efficient way to do it. Now we could hit the fill tool, there you go, and see how that goes. And remember that we're painting into white right here. We're not painting into black, so hence it's tending to favor somewhat lighter than the actual color over here, and that's because it's mixing with the underlying white, right? Obviously. So having done that, we can darken it a little bit and say, now I just kind of want to feel what would this feel like. You know, it's a flat floor. We're going to have some shadows on it, but it seems like there'd be a little bit of a gradient where maybe there might be some sunlight or something that's kind of bleeding in, that's going to catch the front part of the stage, but as you move to the back, it's going to maybe be a little darker, that type of thing. So, you know, this is an anime, this is a cartoon. We're not trying to do a photoreal painting here. If I was, I'd probably take the time to get more reference and that kind of thing. So well, it's always good to learn about other creative works that people are doing and are enthused about. Okay, now I'm going to switch back to green. Probably the best way would be to hit the R key and just sample this color, but I want to go pretty dark on it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of just chisel in this background. Pretty dark. We'll just get it blocked in. And again, actually there's one channel on I'm not going to go look it up right now, and I can't remember the name, but it's basically an oil painting channel. He did a really good video where he talked about the fact that usually when people do these channels on YouTube, a lot of times you don't actually see the real process of sort of chiseling something out, realizing it's not right, making corrections, fixing it up, changing your mind. You know, you don't usually see that. And he did a really good video kind of talking about what that process really looks like, because sometimes it's easy to think that, you know, people, because they're talented or whatever, you know, they just sit down and knock it out and it's easy. You know, some things do become easier, for sure. But basically, that's totally an illusion. Everybody that's doing good work has actually learned how to sort of iteratively you know, they have a workflow, and they take some effort. Mistakes will be made all the time. And if you hate that, what the heck are you doing trying to paint or animate, you know? Now for me, I'm actually the guy who might be saying, oh, I hate that. And that's because my number one driver is not, I like to paint, I like to animate, but it's not probably my number one driver. My number one driver is the storytelling. And that's true. Max is making an interesting point. I'm using the, sorry Maria, I missed your question there. In the my paintbrushes, it's the oil paint, and I kind of learned this a long time ago using my paint, that this brush it's really a good brush. It's the settings are dialed in to be a better than average combination of painting and smudging, you know, and mixing. It's pretty intuitive. So if I go with a lighter shade here, it's kind of it feels pretty good to just work it in, pick up a little bit of the underlying color. So I'm pushing really softly right now, and then if I push a little harder, I get more of the actual color that's selected in the color wheel, kind of thing, you know. So in this case, and Max made a good point. You know, those pointy hats, they are reminiscent, frankly, of the Ku Klux Klan. Somebody pointed that out one time, a long time ago, and I didn't intend that when I designed their costumes, and I certainly hope nobody takes offense to the resemblance. That was not my intent. They're just pointy hats felt right, you know, at the time. When I one of the earliest shots I did in the show actually was this one, because I worked backwards, and so this was like the costume for Prince Vespar, you know, really early in the show, and so then I just built on that with the soldiers and stuff, and so that was that. Yeah, it's pretty crazy, because if you go into Krita, as far as I'm concerned, Krita only has one brush that is better than this my paintbrush, and it's the one I use all the time for basically, you know, your oil painting type of painting, because you're doing this, you know. I'm just spinning around in circles right now, just trying to blend this, you know. Krita only has one brush that's better than this one, and it's not better enough to compel me to do all my painting in Krita. There are a lot of shots in this show. You go back here again, especially at this point in the show, like this background. Probably this one. I'm pretty sure this was all done with the oil paintbrush, because if you look at the texture of the strokes right there, you can really see that the brush that I'm using right now, you can see it. Now, the detail in the rocks, let me look here. Like, this is all that brush. This is all that brush. The brush I'm using right now, all these backgrounds that were done early in the show when I was starting production, were done with that brush. Now, the caveat to that is that typically when I'm painting, it's going to be this brush and this brush. So this one is, I don't want to click here because it'll change it and then I won't remember which one I was using, but let me look here. It's either this one. This one's really good for real thick, bold type lines where you can really control the thickness of it with pressure. I think this other brush that I use is probably this one. It looks like that's the icon. I wonder if this lets you do a big icon. Yeah, here we go. Large thumbnail view. Oh shoot, that's not what I wanted. That's, anyway, I'll leave it at that for the moment. But yeah, The two I use the most for backgrounds would be this one and this one. And this one comes in handy when you want to go back in. And so, like, I might hit the R key, and now I want to dial back in some detail over the top. And I want a clearer, you know, a real clean ink type line, right? So between those two brushes, it's like that's all I use usually for background painting. Where Krita excels is with you know, essentially particle brushes, like for foliage, where you're getting a little different leaf shape every time. You know, every dab has the, you know, it's like an animated brush almost kind of thing. That's where Krita's pretty nice. And I use the foliage brush in Krita a lot. So in this case, as I said earlier, and the other one I actually use a fair amount is the airbrush. In this case, what I was kind of actually about to say is this is a good example where the airbrush would be useful. If I hit the B key and sample this light color, okay, and then I turn on lock alpha, now what I can do is just ease some airbrush over it in order to, because this is really what I was kind of trying to achieve here. It's just a nice even gradient like that, where it's a little lighter at the top and kind of getting darker at the bottom. And then if I just go a little darker, I can kind of ease that in with the airbrush. So the lock alpha setting is useful here because I chiseled all these pieces out of it. So these are all transparent. Therefore, they don't get painted. Whoops. Okay, that's not what I meant to do right there. They don't get painted over when I'm doing the painting, and you can kind of work in your, you know, some nice gradient effects. So, like I said, between the air, you know, put some hardware around this doorway kind of thing, right? This is where just a plain old pencil, you know, can definitely be useful. And some of that level of detail at actual size, you can see it turns out pretty sketchy, you know. So that's pretty much it. Those 4 brushes have been in my raster brush list, my palette for raster levels, with no changes for months. Literally for months. Okay, so now I want to actually just chisel this out a little bit more and start. Now I'm going to start doing a little bit of that interactive critical work. Now one could say, let's just say, maybe you want to actually, I'm just going to draw a line across here. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, well, let's just say there's some hardware mounted to the wall. There might be some structural elements here. Okay, so we're going to have to do something with them. So there's no harm in sketching them in there. And then one thing that did for me is gives me a guide for the tops of these individual arcs. Now, one thing I'm not sure about is if I grab this color, which is basically transparent, and hit the B key, so now I'm brushing with a standard OpenToonz brush, not a My Paint brush. Does this effectively erase as well? Doesn't look like it. It looks like on the raster level it actually does paint white. Okay, I was wondering about that. So now I'm going to use the E key to actually start tightening up these arches. And again, I'll probably chisel back into it, fix it up a little more, cut it out a little more, whatever. And if it's close, whoops, that's a mistake. If it's close, then it'll be good enough, because it doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical, certainly not perfectly photoreal or anything like that. It's a freaking cartoon, people. We want it to be a little loose, right? All right, so here, now what I'm going to do is go back to my oil paint brush. I'm going to sample that color, but I'm going to go ahead and let it darken a little bit. Lock alpha is on, so now I should be able to kind of just dial in some, you know, just tighten up this little junction between the floor and the ceiling or the wall. And the thing that's fun about this type of painting actually is, as you do this, you start thinking to yourself, well, wait a second. If I was going to build this wall, you know, there's probably going to be some sort of decorative trim or something around these archways and even maybe along the edge of the floor, right? you sort of think of these things that reveal themselves to you as you go along. If you're kind of thinking like a, I'm going to turn lock alpha back off so I can actually start chiseling back back into that transparent area, like so. Okay, I'm checking the. Well, it looks like there's a good bit going on here. Daniel's design and color scheme is based on their sticks and texture from the rest. Thanks. CNH, I think you're already gone, but goes back to using the tools that work best for you. You don't need an endless array. Well, and by the way, every professional like digital matte painter that I've ever listened to an interview or been able to learn pretty solidly like what they do, like 100% of them use very few brushes. They don't have 10 million brushes they use. Right. Max is right. This symbol. Well, you've seen some of the stuff from the show, so I guess I would ask you, does it strike you that way? I mean, but you're correct. And it's kind of there's conventions about that. I mean, obviously angular shapes are associated with villains typically, and rounder shapes are associated with babies or good guys and that sort of thing. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and lock the alpha and just try to grab a little bit of some sort of a border thing. I think I'm kind of making it on the big side, but that's okay. That's all right. We're just gonna feel this as we go, because what happens for me is I'm saying, okay, so now you got some, okay, so there's something constructed here. Well, now that there's something there, now I'm gonna start thinking about, well, okay, well, what would it really look like in the real world? It'd be catching some light, presumably, things are lit from the top. So you're going to catch a little bit of a highlight around this edge, and we'll say, okay, if that's what the basic shape of it's going to be, then that's fine. Then let's make it look, sort of 3D or whatever. And so I'm just using the standard pencil type brush. And I don't claim to be the greatest at this. I am not the greatest at background painting. I mean, I think I do okay. But there's probably any number of people that are way better at it than I am. So you just really want to be aware. Now, in this case, I can think of a sort of a cheap or quick way to make it look even better. What I would do is I'd say, okay, well, let's just kind of put like a little decorative beveled thing in there, and then go back to our highlight color and let that catch a little bit of light like that. And then what's going to happen is it's just going to suggest to the eye at a glance, it's going to look, 3D-ish, like it's got some thickness or decoration to it. I don't know, thickness isn't the right word that I meant to say just now. I'm literally, by the way, just using black and white. I'm taking, and I'm using a pretty light touch. I'm also trying to kind of step back from this painting and look at what I'm seeing and feeling from it, so I do a good job of delineating the shapes without necessarily going too far. No, that didn't work. And by the way, I probably should save my work. Thanks, Maria. You were probably sending me a... That's a great point, Max. You know, being sensitive to the cultural biases of your audience is definitely not a bad thing. But again, I certainly was not. I wasn't trying to emote or invoke an emotional response to the with the pointy hats. That would be a falsehood. Not at all. I was just looking for something that I thought looked cool for the bad guys for some costumes. But that's kind of typical me. I mean, I'm kind of winging it a little bit. All right. So let's grab this color. We've got lock alpha turned on. So what we should be able to do here is actually just bleed in a little bit of shadow from these doorway areas. I don't know if that actually makes sense. It's not going to be lit back there. I think what I'm going to do is actually wind up putting some kind of gradient back there. All right. Now I'm going to sample that color so that I can actually bake back into it. We want to keep this kind of simple, actually. We don't want to go too crazy with the... detail. I guess detail is the word I was groping for there. All right, let's do this. I'm going to save my work again. Then what I'm going to do is rotate the canvas. So, being a right-hander, yeah, I figured you were sending me that message, Maria, because you sent it to me explicitly plenty of times. Okay, and now what I'm going to do, okay, that's not what was supposed to happen. I'm actually going to shrink this baby down. As you can see, this is another reason why you don't need 18 billion brushes, is because this one, I mean, if you shrink it down, it becomes more or less like a pen, you know. Okay, that's probably needs a little less saturation there. Jack. So I just want to put a lip around the bottom of the stage. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to, let's go to -2 here. Gosh. I think I actually want. So I wish it was, it was quicker to change pen sizes. You know, that's a pretty nitpicky thing to complain about, since obviously back in the day, you know, software was never as, you know, quick and intuitive as it is now. You know, in other words, like if you want to change your brush size in Krita, you just press the control key and drag, you know, just drag your mouse and it changes size. That'd be a wonderful thing to have in OpenToonz. At this point, changing your brush size and little things like that definitely make a big difference between painting software. Like software that's dedicated painting software, you know, you're looking for those types of conveniences because you want this unimpeded creative workflow. You don't want to stop and have to drag a wheel or, you know, a slider just to change your brush size, right? But there is another point to be made about that, if you want to argue it. If you were dealing with real paint, you'd actually have to stop and change brushes. So one could argue this: is it not possible that your creative effort is made better by the fact that you have to take those moments, because you take that moment to think about what you're doing, right? I think that's a fair case to be made. Now in this case, what I'm going to do is actually start chiseling this stuff out. A little bit risky behavior because I'm going to have to kind of chisel it out a little piece at a time. Probably doing it this way would make way more sense. Boom. There we go. There we go. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. All right. I've got Shift-Alt-R set up as a hotkey for that. Okay, so now that's kind of cool because now what I can do, let's go back to my brush, pretty dark, turn lock alpha back on, and now we can go in and just really tighten up that edge. Tighten the edge. Oh, there goes Val. I got to confer with her for a second on the stock trading stuff. So that means I got to take a break. Right? So if I'm going to take a break, I'm going to just like play. I think I'm going to just play some of the late stuff that was animated a while ago. And I'm going to be back in 5 minutes. All right? Uh-oh. That means you guys just the little surprise that the real audience is going to get for this show when it's released is that's one of the fun little things that happens is Tianara being dressed up as a guy. So I don't mind saying that here because the chances that the people that see the show as released are the same people who are going to go back and happen to find that somewhere in my YouTube channel. The odds of that are so small, as we like to say, vanishingly small. Okay, so now one question I'm asking myself is, does this lip have a sharp edge or kind of a beveled edge? And I'm just, for no apparent reason, I'm going to favor a beveled edge. Like it's rounded. Like they really took a lot of time building this stage. And I was just saying to Valerie that this painting is probably going to be used like at least a dozen times, either in its current form or I'm going to create a higher res version of it with even more detail, because the entire 4-minute sequence all takes place in this environment. So taking the time to really get this dialed in, and remember, we can always change it. We can always change it. We can always improve it. It's saved in my extras folder as a painting. I can always make it a little better, add some detail, change anything I want to change, and then just hit Control-Shift-R on each of the scenes that use it and instantly re-render it. And my show is updated with the improvements baked in. That's probably the #1 reason why I'm so anchored to using Tahoma right now, as opposed to Krita. Krita, everything's really hard coded into your files to where every time you make a change, for one thing, you can't have multiple shots that are reusing the same assets. You're reusing a copy of the asset, and if you change it here, you've got to change it 12 times. Not true with Tahoma. With Tahoma, it's all just referencing the same background painting on the hard drive. And so that means it's a very procedural workflow where you can always go back and improve things a little bit and just do a quick re-render, and you're good to go. I love that about Tahoma. If you've done as much media production as I have, I mean, 30 years of all kinds of, music, animation, mostly not so much animation actually, but music, and it's kind of like working with code. It's like the idea that if you're coding, you want to have a function that only exists in one place. You never want 2 copies of a function floating around. Duplicated data always causes problems downstream, every time. And so what happens is now you've got to find every instance of that function and change it to reflect the improvement. You don't want that. And anybody that looks at that equation, like a newbie coder who's tempted to say, well, that function call has an expense associated with it. It costs a little bit of time to go call that function as opposed to maybe baking that functionality into the current situation I'm working on. In this case, with animation, it would be this particular scene. That's a really, really stupid way to look at it, because that expense is so tiny that you would have to call that function literally millions of times for the expense to matter, right? So it's way better to organize your work in a procedural way. In this case, I've gotten that benefit many times where I can go back, improve a shot, and just do a quick re-render, and that opportunity is always available to me with this show, to just improve things anytime I want and know that all I need to do is re-render it. In fact, I can even batch load. I could, if I wanted to, I could use the render farm to take a dozen different scenes and have them all re-rendered in one swoop. I don't normally do that, but you can if you want to. So yeah, exactly to Maria's point. The procedural aspect of it is hugely important. Okay, so now, let me think about this for a minute. I may go back and refer to some anime. There was actually an episode of Fairy Tale that I saw recently that involved this very... Well, there was actually an entire arc that involved this competition situation where you had a stadium with people in the stands, like all over the place. And man, the way they did it was simple. I mean, it's like literally, if you were going to emulate that, you'd probably set this to like -2, and it was like you just have it was like this, you know, it was like just little shapes of different colors, you know, just kind of random, you know, because of their clothes. You know, it was so simple, but it worked, you know. It just was. But I don't think I want to do that now. I'm really more focused on this building, and to be perfectly accurate, this is pretty rough. I don't want to suggest that I think I've done a particularly great job here, because I don't think I have. It's okay. It's okay, and it's going to serve the purpose probably most of the time. We can crop it to, you know, here's what the camera actually sees for this shot, and we're going to have people, you know, populating this stage. You're not going to be looking at this painting. The painting is just going to give you a feeling. You're going to be looking at the people, particularly because Golik's going to be standing right here and he's going to raise his arms. So the first time we see this shot, the first thing we're going to see is him moving. Or maybe he's walking across the stage. I don't remember. But the bottom line is, you're not going to be thinking about the painting. You're going to be thinking about the characters. So it could be certainly argued that a vector level, for example, that just has sort of the outline of the people all filled in with a common fill color or something would probably work just fine, because you're not going to be thinking about the crowd either. But you might want to say, well, okay, let's do the crowd in such a way so there's one person, you know, maybe if it was a sporting event, you might have one person in the crowd that's doing this. You know, they're doing the little fist pump or something. That's not appropriate to this because this isn't a sporting event, it's a wedding, but you know, the principle is the same. Now, just for completeness, I'm going to go ahead and start filling in some of this. This area down here. You know, what would you have? Let me think about this for half a second. Obviously, the stage is elevated. Okay, so in essence, what is this geometrically? Well, I mean, basically it's a cylinder. Again, not the world's greatest cylinder. And how much time you want to spend. I'm going to keep running with this from the standpoint of sort of building up the level of detail. I'm kind of feeling like I want some sort of, like this would overlap a little bit, right? There'd be something that would indicate that these, I mean, there's got to be some structural foundation behind the wall. It may be covered or plastered over and then painted and that sort of thing, but there's going to be some sort of structure there that allows it to rest on the cylinder. You know, there's an architecture to it. We want to suggest, by the way, that it is cylindrical in the sense of, you know, it kind of has a dome. It's a dome type situation. I mean, we saw it in earlier shots from the outside. It's literally a dome. Now, using a mid-tone color like this for this is really quite useful, because what it does is it makes it so that it's shadow in the lighter areas and it's lighter in the shadow areas. So, you know, like this tone right here kind of lightens up a little bit down here and it's darker up here. So that's where using a mid-range value can be definitely pretty useful. I've done that a lot of times with painting rocks and things like that. So I don't have the physical construction of this figured out in my head yet. I'm just playing around with the way the shapes sort of fit together and fall together, you know. Like here, if you had this, wouldn't that create a little bit of a a shadow around that junction point, right? Just a little bit of a shadow underneath that footing. You know, that's the kind of stuff I'm just thinking about here and just letting it unfold. As I said, taking my time on this painting is smart because it's going to, some version of it is going to get used over and over and over in the next many minutes of the show. Well, 4 anyway. 4 minutes. You know, catch a little bit of that. It almost is suggesting that what I'm thinking about now is the fact that there might actually be a little bit of a curvature inward to these sections. Like maybe there's sort of a what would you call it? You know, sort of a structural skeleton behind this. Like if you were building a boat, you know, you build the framework of it and then you put a thinner material over top of it, kind of thing, right? I'm thinking about maybe that would be really what's kind of going on here. And for me, I mean, you know, that's part of the fun. Part of the fun is just playing with it. Experiment with ideas. Now I'm thinking about kind of softening this so that maybe these items jut out a little bit more. Now here's where Krita or some other program is going to be better, because if you want to take this entire selection and you say, well, really I want this to be a different color, like I want it to be some different material than the green, that's a little harder to do. That's where there's a couple ways I could do that here. And I've done it before where I've turned off these guides, and this is really the poor man's way to do it, but this is the actual size of the frame that would be ultimately on TV. In other words, this is the highest resolution version of this painting you're ever going to see. So if I actually made a screenshot of it and then painted over it in Tahoma or in Krita and pasted it back, that would serve the purpose. You know, you go Alt, print screen, you jump into Krita, just create a new shot that's broadcast HD. So I don't want it to be that size. I want it to be 1280 by 720. And I'm sorry, I'm not creating it from the clipboard. That was a boo-boo. I just made a mistake. 1280. If I make this 1280 by 720 and create a new shot, then what should happen is I can paste this in, literally crop it to the right size. Now there's a little fiddling required, but let's face it, you're talking about a couple seconds of fiddling, and now if I wanted to, I could go in, work with layers, you know, save this as a temporary Krita file. So I'll just save, actually I'll save it as this one. Okay, I just saved under the wrong file name. That doesn't matter because that's basically a temp folder where I save temp Krita files that I doubt I'll have to come back to later, but I might. Right, so, and then you just cut and paste it back into Tahoma. So that's always available to you. That's about as simple as it gets. And if you really are married to the idea of a more elegant connection between your softwares, where they're really it's like which you get with Adobe products, for example, where there's a live connection where you can actually be dancing between Illustrator and Photoshop and probably After Effects even, I guess. I don't know, but you know, that is really elegant. But the reality is that to do it the way I just did it, the poor man's way, takes literally, you know, 1 minute to implement. So how much do you really want to complain? I use the term loosely, complain. Obviously you guys aren't complaining. All right, so question, what color would that be? Well, I think it would lean towards the tan end of the spectrum. So I'm going to do this the hard way. I'm going to do this where the inner part is, at least for now, is going to stay greenish, And there's sort of an additional, I don't know. Kind of like the idea of that being smooth and rounded, actually. And in that scenario, what it's really doing is it's actually just picking up the green as reflected light, which probably makes more sense if you think about it. If this was like, especially if it was not necessarily gold, but something, you know, some expensive material, you would think it probably would be picking up some of the dominant color of the walls around it and stuff. So not too shabby, not too shabby. It's actually feeling better now that I've got a little different color happening in this trim. So I'm gonna run with that idea. Just 'cause I can. Just 'cause it's fun. And the more I just kind of scribble, the smoother it gets. Usually that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. You don't always want everything to be like super smooth. Here we're going to allow this to fall into shadow a little bit more on the outskirts. And catch a little bit of that sort of internal. Oh, so there's another thought. There's another thought. Wouldn't you have some sort of internal edge here? You know, where it sort of goes in. You'd see it here. Kind of falling under the light here as this curves around and begins to face us. You see something kind of like that. You'd say, well, if that's really rounded like that, then the top part of it would really be catching the light, wouldn't it? Yeah, of course it would. So let's just play with that. I guess I'm in my Bob Ross mode right now because I'm talking like I'm about to start mentioning happy little clouds. But my Bob Ross mode is being interrupted because I'm feeling another psychic message from Maria Torres. Okay, Maria, I got you. I got you. I just saved it. Saved my work. So what's the weakness here? Well, the weakness now is these junction points at the bottom. Now, if I wanted to kind of reboot that a little bit, let's add a little bit of blue to it, and now let's be a little more aggressive. Let's say this really actually has some. I want to go pretty dark on this, by the way. Let's say there's really some structure to this. There's something kind of wrapping around these. You know, kind of sewing all these elements together. When you're doing carpentry or, you know, fixing up your house or whatever, this kind of thing comes up all the time. Where what you learn to do is hide stuff. You learn how to hide the you know, those junction points can be pretty messy. You know, if you look at the way drywall, you know, gypsum board, the way it dovetails, you know, maybe at the ceiling or at the floor. That's why you have trim around the floor. There's trim around the floor to hide the ugly junction point, you know. And for me, oh, hey, Darren T. Welcome to the, what has morphed into essentially a background painting exercise. Haven't talked to you in a while, my friend. Good to see you. Finished work and have skimmed through the earlier part of this stream. Good. Hopefully you found the discussion of vectors, you know, reasonably well informed. Like I think I did an okay job of kind of hitting the hot topics about vectors, and you know, because as I said, people who are new to the software, at least this is what I've noticed, and I certainly did it too when I very first started using OpenToonz like more than 2 years ago, tend to gravitate to vectors. That's kind of what tends to turn them on from what I've seen. For understandable reasons, you know. So now I'm actually going to flip this guy over I'm going to drill into it a bit and start just really drawing more than painting here. I'm just going to kind of see, all right, let's see what this really is. What are we trying to draw here? All right, we're going to have this edge. I'm just in pieces. Well, it probably would have. Therefore, those pieces are going to have a little bit of dimensionality to them. Like so, something like that. Now if we flip this back up, hit the N key. Okay, very interesting. So basically that level of detail is very, very difficult to see. You actually can't even see it. So that's something you want to be aware of. If this is actual size, it's good to be tuned into where you're actually working. You know, it's what I just did is really easy to do. You start painting in a bunch of detail and you realize, oh, everything I just did actually doesn't matter because you're never going to see it. And it means that I need to be bolder with my contrast here. I'm fixing the shape right now because obviously this is looking like it kind of changes thickness as it walks around the shape. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to deliberately use my pencil to be more bold, really able to be seen. I'll bet you when we zoom in, you're going to be horrified. Yeah, it's pretty rough, pretty pixelated, right? That's okay. All that matters is what's it going to look like when you see it on TV, right? And I do like the way this is working. So I'm going to keep going on that particular path. I think I'm going to put the pencil back to its default size to see if that kind of allows me, yeah, that allows me to kind of target the correct density of detail more easily. So these guys need to be, you know, we kind of need to spell out what's going on structurally. Boo-doop, boo-doop. And this is where your painting will start to pop and look cool because it's really these little pieces with the little glints of specular highlight and stuff that change it from being kind of a flat, you know, sort of stupid looking piece of digital art to something where at least viscerally it starts to feel more real because in reality that's what you're seeing. In the real world, that's what you see, is you're seeing the reflection of light on stuff. Right? That's what eyes actually see. And so, if you can paint what the light is doing, it's gonna feel like what people actually see. Now in this case we have the problem I described earlier, which is if this decorative material is rounded, okay, I'm not gonna say that the decision to make it rounded is a definitively great choice. I think it's okay. Everything's looking a little bit maybe too rounded and bulbous and not necessarily hard-edged enough, okay? But if we're going to go with that, then for sure there would be a degree of shadow underneath every single one of these. You can see I have to go really dark in order to catch that value. So that's going to be like that. And I'm not going to blend it too much. I'm just going to let the pencil sort of do what it does. So just a little bit of a shadow catch there. Okay, the thing I'm not liking so much is this wasn't really bisected very cleanly. So now what I'm going to go in and do is actually try to fix these. You know, is this webbing actually, is the fabric, let's say it is fabric. It might not be, but let's say it's fabric that defines these essentially the interior wall of this dome, okay? Well, if there's a structure that holds this webbing together, is the structure visible or not? If it is visible, then this might actually be in front of the webbing. And if it's in front of the webbing, then maybe we treat it like those tents where we say, well, okay, there's going to be some sort of methodology they use to connect the webbing to the, you know, to the structure, right? And it doesn't have to be too regular, because if you were actually doing this in real life, they don't have to be exactly the same distance apart or anything like that. And if you were going to do that, for me, I'm thinking also there'd be these intermediate ones too. So we're really driving home the shape of the dome now. This is actually starting to come together. Purely by trial and error. There's not much of a plan here, folks. Not much of a plan. Okay, so now I'm going to sample this color to say, okay, we know we've got an overhead light that's coming down. So now how is that going to be caught by this, you know, by the manner in which this must have been constructed? And I'm just going to say, you know what, I don't know, but it would definitely be catching some highlights here and there, right? And so you just smack them in there, here and there. A little of this, a little of that. It's actually not too bad. I mean, this is kind of starting to feel like what I had in mind. Now this is what's actually absent from Tahoma as far as working with the raster levels. What's missing is, unless maybe Darren knows something about this, is there really isn't a way to do the opposite of lock alpha, which would be to make it so that I cannot paint over what's ever been painted, and all I do is paint into the transparent areas. So really the only effective way to do that is to paint behind it on another level. I think in this case that's what I'm going to do. Even though I've got this black background, it doesn't quite do the job for me. So I'm going to create a plain old raster level. Waiting for it to create. That's fine. I don't care about giving it a name or anything. And I'm just going to hit the fill tool, and you can see what happened. So what I want to do is fill it with black. Now I don't really need this vector level anymore, so I'm just going to delete it, because I really want to be able to paint into my black background. So now I'm going to save everything. That way each of these components will get saved individually, and later I could take whatever layers I need to create this background painting and then go ahead and sum them together as a sub-scene, and that way I've just got one column in my main animated scene with the background on it. So Darren says the only paint behind option in the smart raster levels is to paint where you haven't yet painted. Right. So I'm just going to do it this way. Now if the prevailing color of the outside of the building is red-ish, so what I'm going to do is grab some red. We'll just see how this goes. And what I'm thinking is, now what I want to do is just suggest, that was the wrong color there, friend. I said red, you silly goose. Ooh! Okay, so now, again, this is a good example of where you just don't have the flexibility with Tahoma that you would have in Krita or something like that. Because what I really would want to do right here, I would love to have a destructive curves tool in Tahoma, where I can actually just pop up a curves modifier to just adjust either the, frankly, everything, the hue, the saturation, the value. You know, a curves tool that's destructive for raster levels would be awesome. But we don't have that, so that's okay. I'm going to go to blue. Actually, here's red, so the complement would be aqua. So I'm going to go to a real dark aqua and start to work back into that to sort of mute that a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to play with this. So I'm going to go back to my red now. Ooh, I don't like that. That was a boo-boo. So I do want the red to be, I think, slipping in. I was actually thinking that it would be more shaded toward the bottom, but I think I might have had that wrong. And sorry about that. The complementary color doesn't really help me much in this case. So I just want to give a hint of the red exterior behind this interior wall system that we're looking at. If we're going to show the full scope of this building, what probably you would really see is you'd probably be looking through some sort of entrance into this sort of pavilion kind of situation. But we don't have to show that. I mean, this is what matters. We're going to have the crowd in the background. The other thing I want to do in this background painting is give some indication of what we're thinking as far as the base of this cylinder. Okay, I better save my work. That little hiccup right there seems a little off, so I'm going to save again. So I want to take a color something like this and just define that cylinder, that this whole stage is resting on effectively a cylinder. So just a straight line, just go like this. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll work some shadow into it. So this will be really easy to make look pretty good, actually. All right, so we just do that. Now just grab some black, and what we're going to do is just, you know, obviously that lip is going to have a cast shadow. So that's easy. This is where thinking in terms of the fundamental shapes that define your stuff is really the way to think about it. That's all I wanted. I just wanted something like that, so it seems like there's some structure underneath it. The other thing we don't have the ability to do in Tahoma is, other than with a subscene, is take these two levels and just go ahead and bake them back together again. Okay? So now what we could do, if we really wanted to do that, here's how I would do it. I would do it the poor man's way. Why do I keep seeing this little shape right here? B key. I keep painting over it and it keeps reappearing. Alright, so the way I would do it is with the Krita method. I would do Alt Print Screen, come back here, just paste this in, then I would come back to Tahoma. Well, in this case, actually, I guess effectively I did just paste them together. Isn't that crazy? So now all I have to do is go like this. Just line this up a bit. It's hard to see the edges. So, again, as I've said many times, how long did that take? You know, it took 1 minute to do what Tahoma by itself can't do. You know, you just need one other program you can cut and paste into to solve that problem. Pretty cool. Pretty cool, my friends. Pretty cool. How we doing here? I've got a 30-second. You can. Darren, I love you, dude. I love you. Okay. So this is something I should have known and I've never even looked at. Adjust. There it is, dude. There it is. Oh my goodness. Alias, binarize, color fade. I think this is probably what Darren's talking about, and okay. You know, this is about as crude a methodology as you can have, but I mean, it's sure better than nothing. I mean, look at that. That's very interactive. Dials it in, and frankly, you know what? I kind of like that. Now, I'm going to take a real chance here. I've saved my work, so what if I go like this? Oh, dude, I like that. It's a little saturated. But that's okay. Now, the question is, can I hit undo? I can. Undo works. Okay. Okie dokie. And now, if you weren't really totally sure that's what you wanted, but you thought maybe, then just do this. I don't know if you can do it with cut and paste, but let's do it this way. I'm going to take this drawing, I'm going to hit the D key, create a duplicate, put the duplicate in this level, and then do what I just did. Adjust the brightness and contrast. The settings are remembered, which is great. And now I've got this additional level that I can actually just turn up and down this way if I want to crank up the brightness and contrast. So what a great example of where what you wish you could do with Tahoma but didn't think you could, it turns out you can. Awesome. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You've helped me so many times, it's just stupid. Unbelievable. And I want this turned on so that I can actually use the column transparency to decide how much of that I want to bake in. And now remember, the other thing I want you guys to remember is I am working in a subscene right now. So that means that at any time, this is the actual shot I'm going to be working on that's going to be animated. Right? So all those levels are just baked down to a single level in my outer scene. So, thanks, Darren. Man, thank you. Try the other options in that menu. You might find something else. I know. You're right, dude. Well, adjusting levels certainly... but I think the thing I contributed to this little thing that maybe people hopefully will find useful is this idea. Is if you want to make a change and you want it to be non-destructive, just make a duplicate of the painting and drag it into another level. Adjust the level. And remember, the other thing about that is you can always do it non-destructively too. If you go into preview mode and hit F3, here in the effects right here, you could always go in here and add an image adjustment, curves. Alright, and I'm going to close the schematic, and here's the curves adjustment. And now we can always do a non-destructive version of it as well. Right? And so that's one of the things with Tahoma is you want to be kind of thinking about the stuff that you want to be able to just instantly paint into it and change things and just do what you're trying to do versus have a second window open with your rendered preview and make those additional adjustments as needed, you know. And so this kind of comes back to, and I'm going to take this out because I don't actually want it in there, but comes back to what I've been saying repeatedly about Tahoma and OpenToonz is that everything you want to do is there. You just have to look for it. And here's a great case where there's something I was able to do that I didn't even realize, and I had to have Darren point it out to me. Let's see. Yes, that's the rendered, so this is the preview. Okay, so we turn on the preview, and now, because this is semi-transparent, I'm just going to go ahead and hit my oil paint brush. And what I want to do is kind of, I'm going to put this at -1, and I just want to get a little bit of ribbing, if you will. So in other words, we said this is a cylinder, okay? Now, actually, I probably should put it in this level because this level is actually underneath the other two, right? So I should be painting into this. But here's the idea. The idea is that this isn't just a cylinder. I mean, it's not like a, you know, a vegetable can or something, right? This, whatever this floor is resting on has a structure to it as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I think I'm going to just erase these people that I had in there. So I need to do that in both of these frames. There's no reason for them to be in there. Save our work. It's taking a second for Tahoma to save it, so I'm going to hit undo and see if it... Yeah, it's not going to catch the undo. That's my fault. I should have waited for it to save. So I need to hit the R key, sample this, and then repaint that. No big deal. Totally my fault. Okay, so here I'm going to put another little hint there of one of those ribs. So what is the rib? Well, the rib is actually, I'm going to go to black here. So this is about, I don't know, the stage is up there, you know, probably 6 feet high or more. And so I'm thinking that these ribs that are holding it up, or these walls actually is what they really are, maybe they stick out a little bit, but maybe there's also an interior cylinder. As I'm painting it here, I'm thinking of this. So maybe you've got this interior cylinder, and then it comes out. There's this structural stuff that sort of comes out. And in a way that's good for them because So this is one of the ways they keep people from climbing up on the stage, right? Because if you actually walked right up to the edge of the stage, you could go under it a couple feet, but basically there's really no way, unless you're a really good jumper, to just like get up on that stage, right? So, you know, those are just practical things I'm thinking of that maybe that might have actually factored into the architecture of the, you know, this public event location that they're operating in. That's kind of cool stuff to think about. You know, at the end of the day, when the people are all here, these people are only going to be about, let me see, I'm going to save my work, give it half a second to save, and then what I'm going to do is turn this back on. Sorry, not rendered mode, I want to see that. Okay, yeah. So you can see that the actual size of the people, they're pretty small, you know. And the only thing that's probably wrong with the storyboard imagery is that these people that are in the audience, probably there should be a little bit more of a gap between their heads, the top of their heads, and the bottom of the stage, actually. But the basic concept's kind of working. You know, again, I can't get rid of this second level. Yeah, the problem is the effect I want is sort of halfway in between. So what I'm going to do is actually get rid of this. And then I'm going to take this one and I'm just going to kind of be bold here and do the adjust. Good thing here with Tahoma, definitely, that I really like, is the fact that it remembered my prior settings, but for some reason now I've just hit a bug. Okay, there we go. It remembered my prior settings, so that's super cool, because now I can just dial it back a little bit. Kind of split the difference, and there we go. Nice. Nice, 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 nice. Now, having done that, I'm actually seeing that now on this outer level that has the walls, I want to once again go back with my airbrush and start dialing that in. Look at that. That's starting to look cool. That's starting to look cool. It's starting to look cool, people. This is actually the first time today that I've said, oh, okay, now it's starting to look the way I wanted it to look. Always fun. Just dial it in with the airbrush a little bit. I like it muy mucho. Not too shabby. The only thing I don't like is the, let's see, that's actual size. So the only thing I don't really like is this decorative junction stuff looks a little bit more haphazard than it should be, I would say. It's not horrible. It's going to be mostly covered up with people. Okay, but if we give it a little more detail, that may help actually distract from the sort of sloppiness of it. Okay. Oh, Happy Days. Hey, yeah. Yeah, Happy Days was the guy who was struggling with the. I hope you don't mind me saying so. Happy Days. Yeah, he's the guy that was struggling with the vector levels. Everything I talked about earlier in the stream today was because of the issues Happy Days was having with OpenToonz, and I was really glad to be able to help him out. And I'll be honest with you, Happy Days, my initial answer to your comment when you said OpenToonz is, you know, expletive deleted, I really was being a little snarky, because my comment was, so are you saying you don't like OpenToonz? I mean, I was being a little sarcastic just for fun, you know. Not trying to be combative or anything. And like yourself, I was kind of glad that you decided to come back and explain your problem a little more than you had initially, because it was you know, I was happy to be able to help. You know, it's cool. It's cool, you know. Helping people is a good thing. We want to help people. And yes, to answer your question, the streams are always, at least, you know, in recent history, the streams are always posted as watchable videos. afterwards, after I'm done streaming. So, yep. I haven't actually done an uploaded video in a long time, just because I don't want to deal with editing or uploading. I just don't want to screw with it. So if people want to watch me, you know, kind of get my work done, cool. So that's what I'm doing. But yeah, I'm actually feeling pretty good about this. Now, I'm going to add one more detail that I think would be really kind of cool. Let's just say we need to think about perspective here. And I know, by the way, somebody's going to pipe in probably that there are perspective helper tools in Tahoma, and I know Darren knows all about those. I have never, ever, one time ever used them, so I can't speak intelligently about them. Why do I say that? Well, because for this shot, actually, let's think about this from a perspective standpoint. Let's go ahead and turn the drawing back on. Okay, so what we're really doing here is, when you think of perspective, what you're really thinking about is you. Where are you? Okay, so when somebody identifies the perspective horizon line, that is actually the level that you are at, because you are effectively the camera. So that's you being projected, your viewpoint, down into that screen. Okay, so I am actually up here looking down, and now if we go ahead and draw out from there, then if there were, in other words, if this stage had to be assembled in planks, this is kind of the perspective we'd be dealing with. It's basically a one-point perspective. Okay? So I say that because in this case, our horizon line, this X is a little distracting. I wish it wasn't there, actually, and there's probably a quick way to turn it off, but that's okay. Basically, my horizon line is right about there. Okay? So now if I go like this, and what I probably want to do is pick a mid-tone. I showed this before, but if I pick a mid-range tone, then what's going to happen is anywhere that it's in shadow, it's going to create a highlight, and anywhere that it's a highlight, that it's light, it's going to create a shadow. You see what it's doing? And that allows me to actually give a bit of a plank structure to this floor, which just naturally puts the highlights and shadows in there in a way that pretty much works. I mean, you could dial it in by delineating the highlights and shadows better, but basically it's not a bad starting point. Okay, so the help was very much appreciated. Also the change of mindset. Okay, so you guys that watch me know that I sometimes dole out advice about, you know, sort of like the whole emotional thing, you know, and the psychology of thing. And the thing I said to Happy Days, which I will happily repeat here, is something I've learned myself. Everything about emotional challenges, everything that invokes fear in us, originates. I happen to believe that there's basically only one emotion, really. There's fear versus the lack of fear. Okay. Well, where does fear really come from? Well, it comes from uncertainty. So you get situations, I've been living it and learning it, dealing with trading stocks in the market. Because the marketplace there is no emotion to it. There can't be. The market does not care about you. It's going to do what it's going to do. So you have to really recognize what's within your control and what's not. My point was this. When you have a problem where your software blew up and you're frustrated, what you're dealing with is uncertainty. The uncertainty is, oh my God, I've lost my work. I have to do it over. If I had to do it over, it'll never be as good the second time. And there's a lot of stuff that I've experienced that goes through your mind in those moments. But what's really going on? What's really going on is you have a situation that has introduced uncertainty. What do you do with uncertainty? This is what you do with uncertainty. AAA, 3 things. Accept, assess, act. accept, assess, act. Step one is accept. That means you accept the fact that reality is what it is. You cannot change it. Until you get that clarity by accepting what is, then you can go to step two, which is to assess. In the case of the problem with vector levels, getting a little more information and assessing the situation, realizing, oh, wait a second, hold on, let me take a chill pill here because actually I may not have lost my work. But it's late, I'm tired, I'm frustrated, the software made me mad. Of course, at that moment, it's a real uncertain thing. You're like, oh crap, this is a really big deal. But when you first accept reality as it is, then you can calm yourself down and assess the situation and realize, okay, now there are things I can do about this, potentially. Sometimes it requires you to gain more information because you don't necessarily know all the tricks of the tool. It may cost you. It may cost you 2 hours of poring through the manuals to find the answer. It may cost you having to post something on Discord and hope that someone will answer, or whatever. So that can happen. But once you make your assessment, then you can go to step 3, which is the only thing that's actually under your control, which is act. What are you now going to do about the situation? And maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. Sometimes it fails. But a lot of times what you find is if you go through the first 2 steps, if you first accept reality and quit complaining about it, which I've done plenty of times here. When I've ranted about software on this channel more times than you can count. Darren or Maria, they'll all jump right in and tell you, yeah, Dave's Mr. Rant guy, although I haven't done it too much recently, partly because of the things I'm sharing here. And I learned most of this from that beautiful woman right over there, Valerie, because she has a very challenging condition that forces her to deal squarely with reality on a daily basis, where you cannot make it be something that it's not. You can't. Anyway, but that's what you do. You accept, then you can assess, and then you can come up with a plan, and you act, and then you assess again. Did the plan work? Did the plan fail? Have your moment, throw something again. Absolutely, that's fine. Thanks, Max. I appreciate that. Throw a tantrum, take a deep breath, count to 10, and get your solution. That's right. And, in this case, it turned out really well for Happy Days because it turned out everything that he thought he lost, he didn't lose. It was all there. The PLI files were in the extras folder. And I don't know how long it took you. You could post something in Happy Days if you want to about how long it actually took to recreate the scene. But the comment I've made here is that usually when this stuff happens, it turns out that the fix, it takes like maybe somewhere between 5 minutes and a half hour to actually get back to where you were when the problem happened. So it's usually way faster than it felt like it was going to be. So anyway, yeah, it was a cool little experience to be able to help somebody. It was just pure coincidence that I happened to be paying attention to the comments on an old YouTube video, and then I actually created a snarky response. And I was really glad that you went ahead and explained the situation, because I could tell from that initial explanation that you were really frustrated. I'm like, dude, I've been there. I've been there. I've been there with OpenToonz, like more times than you can count. So many times. But I'm getting better, people. I'm becoming a more mature practitioner of the art of animation. Okay, honestly, I think I might be at a good stopping point. How long we going here? We're in the 3 hours. 3 hours to have a background painting that when we look at the storyboard, here's what's going on. You're gonna have it here. You're gonna have a close-up defocused here. Every single, not these shots, this is the crowd, but every single one of these shots is going to be reusing this painting or some version of it. So do you think I'm going to be going in and really trying to dial this painting in? You betcha, because this is going to be used Like, I'm not even kidding. This shot is actually, some form of this shot is going to get used probably 50 times, right? So, let's take half a second and get it right, you know. So this is not perfect. It's not right yet. I'm feeling like maybe I'd like to see maybe some details up here at the top of these archways. Maybe some detail that will distract from the fact that the archways aren't really that symmetrical. They're a little sloppy. There's other ways you could fix that, though. You could have some, if there were some streamers trailing down from the ceiling, some sort of like we did in the tent. If you had some, I'm just spitballing here, but if you had some decorative stuff that sort of trails down, it would create sort of noise that distracts from the flaws in the painting. You can do that. I mean, it's a really useful. Yes, thank you. And Happy Days, I tell you, thank you for posting that, because I completely agree with you. And hopefully, there's a lot of people that come and check out my live stream that are basically newbies, to either animation or to the particular tools like OpenToonz. And this is something they need to hear. This really, really is something they need to hear, because the reason I talked about newbies gravitating to vector levels, is because it's kind of significant that the aspect of OpenToonz that most newbies seem to gravitate to happens to also be the part of OpenToonz that is the most buggy, and always has been. Darren, you can weigh in and disagree if you do, but I think you're going to agree with me on that point. The vector levels have always been a little persnickety. But if you look at some of the procedures I showed in the first hour of today's video, if you approach them correctly and save your work often, they're really, really useful and powerful. In practice, I don't use them much, except for shadows and sometimes backgrounds. And the reason is because I'd rather paint. I mean, I just would rather paint than, construct a model, in essence, which is what you're doing with the geometry tool. So, all right, having said that, it has been 3 hours. I hope you guys all come back next time. I don't know when that'll be. Probably not today. I'm actually going to add a little texture to these archways as well. Just something that makes them kind of roughs them up, to make them look more hewn or hand created, as opposed to punched out of a, some fabrication method. So I think that'll help. That'll be a small thing to introduce again. What seems like it's just noise, but it makes it feel more real, because the truth is, reality is pretty noisy. Yeah, and it causes some of these little specular highlights to get caught, which also punches up the reality of it a little bit. So, anyway, with that, I'm going to sign off. Probably get some lunch and figure out what the next chapter of my day is going to be. So, cool beans. Thanks for being here.